So good evening. I'm Sue Hampel, Co-President of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum and your MC for this evening. On behalf of my Co-President, Mike Dubinsky, OAM, the Melbourne Holocaust Museum Board, the outgoing CEO Museum Director Jane Joseph, and the newly appointed CEO Steve Cook, I'm delighted to welcome everybody here to the 2024 International Holocaust Remembrance Day event. Can you please turn your phones to silent if you have them? And I'd like to start by inviting Jaden to welcome us to country. Thank you, Jaden.
Wawa Pabanata. Marambik Yarabalang Pabanata. Nungujin Yarabalang Marambik. Nungujin Yarabalang Karapnan. Nungujin Yarabalang Kirip. Yarabalang Marambik. If you'd like to, repeat after me. Hello? Mother Earth, I love you. Mother Earth, thank you for loving me. Thank you for loving my family. Thank you for loving my friends. Now give yourself a cuddle. I love me. So my name is Jaden Williams. I'm a Yalaka Willam man of the Bunwarang language group. I'm here today on behalf of my ancestors, on behalf of the Bunwarang, to welcome you all to this beautiful event. It's an honourable a day of commemoration of a horrible time in history, but a beautiful resistance, because you're still here. You're still pushing through. And as I was sitting down, I was thinking about it, and I was just thinking about how, well, similar it is to the Bunwarang story. So my grandmother, Louisa, can everybody say, hey, Louisa? Hi. So she's my great-great-great-grandmother, all right? And she's the last Bunwarang person left. So she was on the edge of the resistance, on the edge of extinction, and she got kidnapped and taken to Tasmania for 20 years, and everybody else passed away, and she came back, a most resolute woman. She was the first Aboriginal woman to be paid in the whole of the colony, and she wrote letters and letters to ministers and to fight for her people. And that's my great-great-grandmother. And then you have my grandmother. So my grandmother, Nawit Carolyn Briggs, she started the first Aboriginal childcare in the whole of Australia. She won Elder of the Year in the whole of Australia. And she connected families with families. So she connected people with their families, about 700 lost people, or the stolen generation. Just all from her memory, she held and she reconnected kids people that had nobody. She reconnected them with their families. So she's a very honourable woman. And then you have my mother. My mother, Caroline Martin, I think she was here last time and she spoke like this, most resolute woman. And she spoke about her journey on a similar journey to this at the Melbourne Museum. She started the Aboriginal part of the Melbourne Museum. She gave it flavour and she gave it truth. So I was speaking to Robbie at the back, the AV fella, and he was telling me about the liberation of the Auschwitz, and how that day or today unleashed truth-telling and truth, and unleashed the story or the truth. And it's really beautiful because this year is the truth-telling. For the Indigenous people, for the Bunwarang, this year is all about truth-telling and all about evolving and people hearing our story. So it's beautiful to be here. So to honour this beautiful day, one thing I'd like to do is just connect us with our hearts. Can everybody put your hand on your heart? And just say, hello, heart. Say, thank you. Say, I love you. Just connect with your heart. Because I think that's the best way to honour this beautiful day. So on behalf of my ancestors, woman Jake, Meram Big Big, Bunmurang, Nernde, Paraptan, Arawalam. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaden, for your welcome to country and your beautiful stories. You are right, both our people share the importance of truth-telling. We also would like to pay our respects to your elders past and present. And I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the elders in our community, the Holocaust centres in the front 2 rows over here, our founders whose dedication and foresight are the inspiration behind this beautiful museum. It is wonderful to see so many survivors in attendance. In this museum, the largest institution in Australia, solely dedicated to Holocaust education, research and remembrance, we promise to amplify your voices and honour our commitment of Zachor, remember. Now I'd warmly like to welcome the US Consul General Kathleen Lively, the Honourable Andrew Giles MP, Dr Michelle Anada Raja MP, and Dr Monique Ryan MP. Thank you very much for coming. And also I'd like to welcome the many other Jewish community leaders who are here this evening. A special hello to everyone joining us online, including our friends in Canberra and wherever else you are watching this evening's event. 79 years ago, on the 27th of January 1945, the Soviet Red Army liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest of the Nazi concentration and death camps. Since 2005, the international community has commemorated this day as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It is a moment to honour and remember the names and lives of the victims and survivors of the Shoah. It is also a time to reflect on the genocides which followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. This year, perhaps more than any year since 1945, we are called on not only to reflect, but also to recognise that we are remembering the Holocaust in a landscape where anti-Semitism has once again significantly increased since Hamas's devastating October 7 attacks on Israel. If International Holocaust Remembrance Day is to have meaning post-October 7, there must be a recommitment in taking a stand against the resurgence of anti-Semitism. This year's theme is the fragility of freedom, and it is important that we understand the fragility of democracy. Democracy can be undermined when leaders show a weak commitment to democratic rule and when violence is tolerated and democratic institutions are weakened. I'm looking forward to hearing from our 3 panellists later this evening to explore this notion and their reflections on this issue. So I'd like to show you a short video and greetings from the Prime Minister.
Holocaust is not only a lesson, it's also a warning. Events which happened in the past can happen again to the Jewish people or to any other people. They must not happen, but they can happen. Long-aged anti-Semitism, which was the driving force of the Holocaust, did not disappear. Thank you.
From a small museum where we did everything ourselves, and I am proud of our achievements in the memory of all those who were with me and will be after me.
The museum is part of my life now. I didn't expect it to be so beautiful. I don't know how they did it, but it's above what I expected. We can't reach everyone, but most importantly is to reach the children So they open their mind, they think for themselves that what they are doing is the right thing to do, not because they were told to do.
If you tell your story to someone that hasn't been through the Holocaust, they might not always understand or visualize what you are talking about. And I think because of all these artifacts here that have been brought by the survivors to this museum, if you see something physical like that, you can imagine what it was like. And somehow you can understand it better. For a start, it's breathtaking when you go in there. It's got such an atmosphere, it's amazing. That room is a memory to all the Holocaust victims that lost their life in Europe.
That's only what we've got to remember. We have to remember so it never happened again.
Built by a community of survivors, the Melbourne Holocaust Museum is dedicated to you, the next generation. Inside this museum, we hope to ignite your sense of humanity and empower you to champion kindness, tolerance and acceptance wherever you go. Within these walls, we house their stories. Under this roof, we raise their voices. And when you leave, we ask that you carry their memory forward.
We mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day because we must never forget the Holocaust, not the scale of it, nor the shocking depths of its cruelty. As the gates of the Auschwitz concentration camp were opened on the 27th of January 1945, so ended a terrible silence. The full truth of Nazi atrocities, the purposeful execution of more than 6 million Jews and a multitude of other victims was revealed to the world. Almost 9,000 Jewish refugees from Central Europe found asylum in Australia before the outbreak of the war, and many more made their home here in the years that followed. Since the atrocities of October 7 following the Hamas terrorist act, Jewish Australians have been bearing a pain you should never have had to bear again. At the opening of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, I quoted the words of Holocaust survivor Peter Gasper, who said, "The Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers and murders and executions. It started with stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination, hate speech. Hateful prejudice and racism have no place in Australia. As a proudly multicultural nation, we must always denounce and reject anti-Semitism. The memory of the Holocaust must be a conscious act. My government has made it very clear there is no place in Australia for acts and symbols that glorify the horrors of the Holocaust. I'm proud that we have taken firm action to ban the public display of the Nazi salute and criminalise the public display of and trade in Nazi hate symbols. Today we remember all those taken from us. We vow to stand against the prejudice that makes atrocities possible, and we reaffirm that most powerful and simple of commitments: never again.
I'd like to introduce Nina Bassat AM. Nina was born in Lvov, Poland. Nina and her mother survived the Holocaust and came to Melbourne in 1949 as refugees after 2 years in a displaced persons camp in Germany. Nina studied arts and law at Melbourne University. Nina is a stalwart of the Jewish community, having held a number of leadership positions, including President of the Jewish Community Council of Victoria and the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. Nina's memoir, Take the Child and Disappear, recounts her experiences and those of her family members from multiple perspectives as she contemplates the many ways being a child survivor has shaped her life. But Nina is more than all this. She is a spokesperson for the many survivors and an inspiration and mentor to many people. If there is one thing, Nina, that you make really special, it is your relentless positive nature and contribution to your family and the broader community. Nina embodies the survivor resilience and lives her life with grace, compassion, and a warm, generous heart. I have learnt a great deal about strength, survival, and dignity from my friend Nina Bassat. Could you please welcome Nina to the stage?
Democracy, rule by the people and for the people. Such a noble aspiration. Broadly, it means freely elected representative government, adherence to the rule of law, protection of human rights, and protection of prevailing social norms. The erosion or undermining of any of these by corruption of the election process, weakening or disempowering the court system, failing to protect the rights of individuals and groups, will damage or even destroy the democratic nature of society. The collapse of Germany's Weimar Republic in 1933 is a clear example of just how fragile democracy can be. It is also a boilerplate for how to turn a democracy into a dictatorship with efficiency and speed. Economic difficulties, political instability, and social unrest laid the groundwork. A traumatized, impoverished, and frightened population can be easily led, and indeed it was. All it took was someone driven and articulate who made an art form of manipulation, of misinformation, and of sheer willpower. He preyed upon the weaknesses of his country and promised his people a better life. He gave them a vision of greatness, and for that pot of gold, much of the population handed over their freedom and their moral compass. His popularity was unprecedented. He appeared indeed to be of the people and for the people. And so on 30th of January, 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. On 27th February 1933, Hitler manipulated von Hindenburg into issuing the Reichstag fire decree as an essential emergency measure, providing a pretext for suspending civil liberties and arresting political opponents. On 23rd of March 1933, the Enabling Act was passed, giving Hitler and his cabinet absolute power to erect laws, negating all parliamentary functions. 52 days to turn a country from a democracy into a dictatorship. That is all it took, 52 days. What followed needs no detailed retelling in this context. Suffice to say that the loss of democracy in Germany in 1933 led to an incomprehensible horror of such magnitude that to make a modicum of sense of what and how it had occurred, a new legal concept was developed by a Jewish lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, the crime of genocide, the killing of an ethnic group. The politicization and the weaponization of the concept of genocide at the International Court of Justice is not part of today's discussion, but I mention it because it is a warning of how ideas, ideologies, and political structures are frail and capable of manipulation and perversion. And is a warning which we need to heed. This can just as easily happen to democracy. No institution is immune. To become complacent about democratic rights and freedoms is a peril of which we must beware. Most of us who live in a democracy take it for granted. We think it is permanent, immutable, unshakable, as of right, or we did until recently. It is not. Even whilst living in our comfortable bubble, we are aware that political extremism, economic disadvantage, politicians and bureaucrats who are corrupt or pander to populism are among some of the factors which can attack the democratic fabric of our society. And these are only the internal factors. the wars and other international disruptions which happen elsewhere affect us deeply. What then are the symptoms for which we need to look to protect democracy? Is there an economic downturn? Is there a vacuum in strong and morally unequivocal political leadership? Is populism the ruling paradigm, politically, socially, morally? Are our ideas shaped by influencers and sporting heroes rather than by dedicated educationalists and brilliant thinkers? Is the squeakiest wheel getting the most attention, whether it benefits the majority or not? And is the majority being cowed, shamed, cancelled, or doxed into submission? Can we understand and manage the use of artificial intelligence? Can we control and deal with cyber attacks? Is our society vulnerable to viral attacks, to nuclear attacks? If the answer to any of the above is yes, democracy is in danger. If the answer to several of the above is yes, we're veering from democracy towards another form of government, or even toward anarchy. Do not use the term anarchy to shock. I'm using it because increasingly I have come to believe that it is a possibility. Remote, but nonetheless a possibility. Anarchy, as we generally understand it, is a society without rulers, without law, without authority. When hate speech and incitement to violence are given a free pass, when there is no accountability, disruption and violence in the streets, when vile comments on the internet reach pandemic proportions, when the laws which are meant to address these issues are deemed insufficient and cannot be operationalized, that to me is a pathway to anarchy. Once we begin to question the efficacy of our government and of our institutions, once we see a dramatic polarization of our society, I have lost the paragraph, but never mind, I know what I was going to say. That is when we understand that we are nearing a point which we should not be approaching. A case in point is the current level of anti-Semitism in Australia. Whilst there has always been some anti-Semitism here, we have been relatively cocooned against the worst aspects of it. This is no longer the case. The rise of monitored anti-Semitic incidents in Australia since the 7th of October, compared to a previous period last year, is more than 730%. This almost incomprehensible numeric rise comes with a shift in the nature of anti-Semitism in Australia, from verbal to physical, from relatively low level to virulent. Anti-Semitism has become normalized. It is a poignant reminder of how quickly a nation can come to accept as normal what a day ago would have seemed totally unacceptable. Given the recent stratospheric increase in anti-Semitism here, it is no wonder that many Jews in Australia are fearful for their own safety, and even more fearful for that of their children. Shoah survivors are reliving memories which they had hoped and prayed they had managed to shed. This stirring up of past horrors should not be something which we are now again experiencing. But I believe that whilst survivors feel the pain of anti-Semitism acutely, they do not fear it the same way as do our children and our grandchildren. For us survivors, it is a repetition of what we know can happen, and we know that we can survive. This is interesting. In recent months, we have seen that Australia is but a microcosm of the unrest that we see in the rest of the world. We have seen daily life disrupted by unruly demonstrations, by vandalism, by fights between police and violent protesters. Is this the end of our democracy? No. Is it a danger sign? Yes. Are we at the tipping point between democracy and anarchy? Some say that we have passed it. I choose to be more optimistic. Nonetheless, I cannot ignore the zeitgeist and the tools at its disposal. The power of propaganda is frightening. We saw the brutality and brutally effective use of it by the Nazis. In our time, propaganda can be amplified to a roar. The internet, social media, the press, television, all combine to give a platform to everybody. There is no moral or intellectual hierarchy. If you can speak, if you can write, whether grammatically or not, you have a voice. And the voice can be disproportionate to your knowledge and understanding of what that voice is shouting. As the world learned to its sorrow during the Shoah, if the lie is big enough and you repeat it loudly enough and often enough, it will indeed become the truth and the norm. For the younger generation, this is a new and indeed frightening reality. Yes, they understood there was anti-Semitism, but the suddenness, the depth, and the ugliness of it is a cataclysmic shock. Should we be frightened? No. Should we be proactive? Clearly. Many of us in this room know that silence is the best friend of evil. Many of us understand at gut level that the voices of bystanders do not count. If we are invested in the concept of democracy, we need to do things, small or large. If you're a witness to antisocial, discriminatory behavior, whether it is anti-Semitic, racial, gender-based, whatever form it takes, speak out. And if it warrants it, record it and report it. Call it out for the evil that it is. If there is an article in the paper or online which promotes divisiveness and relies on patent misinformation, write to the editor. If there is a program on TV which expresses egregious opinions, make your views known. Advocate with state and federal government for stronger anti-discrimination legislation. We have legislation, but it appears to be toothless. We need legislation which can be operationalized. Hate speech has gone unchecked. Protests which go far outside the limits of peaceful and acceptable protesting continue unabated, and disruption to our previously multicultural and harmonious society is being normalized. Speak to your parliamentary representative about it. I am. None of the above measures sound like big tasks, and they're not, but it may help to swing the pendulum away from anarchy and towards democracy. Shoah survivors, from their deep knowledge of loss and horror, of destruction, of all that they held dear, both personal and communal, fully understand and greatly value democracy and all of its byproducts: freedom of expression, adherence to the rule of law, observance of human rights, respect for every individual. Yes, we do value these greatly, but we're not unique in doing so. Everyone in this room, just by being here, has shown that you have an equal commitment to the values of democracy. What survivors do understand more clearly is the fragile nature of democracy. The tilting from a democratic system to a totalitarian one can be speedy and irreversible. We know and remember that it can happen in 52 days. I'm not suggesting that we're racing towards a broken democratic system, but we cannot ignore or gloss over what is happening to democracy as we know it. Australian society, as elsewhere, is facing an unprecedented attack on its democratic values from all political extremes. The apparent inability or unwillingness of authority, both at leadership level and on the ground, to exert any control over this behaviour is exacerbating the unease in our society and undermining our trust in leadership. At every level, logic, sound political analysis, and civil discourse are rapidly flying out the window and may never re-enter. It therefore behoves us now, at a time of unrest and division, to grasp our freedom and to protect it in any way that we can. Fight for your democratic rights. Speak often and with moral clarity and with knowledge. I do believe that Australian values of fairness, equality, and inclusiveness are real, and that they do exist in what is loosely referred to as the silent majority. The problem with the silent majority is that no one knows what it is saying. We do not have the luxury of staying silent. We need to protect that which we value, and democracy is very high on that list. I'm constantly aware of Professor Yehuda Bauer's statement that if it has happened once, it can happen again. But I do not treat it as a prediction. Rather, I live in the hope that by knowing that it can happen again, all people of good faith and open heart can and will do everything in their power to ensure that it does not. You who are here tonight have the power to halt the fragility of democracy, and it is a power that you should use.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Cook. I'm the CEO of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. On behalf of us all, Nina, thank you. Thank you for your... Thank you for your oration, for your truth-telling, for your inspiration, and your call to action. And we, as a community, reaffirm our commitment to you and to all Holocaust survivors to listen, to hear, and to act. Thank you. It's my very great pleasure to introduce a very esteemed panel of people who are going to help us explore some of the issues that Nina talked about in her talk. So I would like to invite to the stage Dr. Daniel Heller, Nyadol Nguyen, OAM, and Dr. Kylie Moore Gilbert, please. I will introduce them as they are taking their seats. Daniel is a senior lecturer in East European Jewish history at Monash University's Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization. His areas of research specialisation are East European Jewish history, the history of humanitarian aid and international development, and the history of Zionism and modern Israel. Nyadol Nguyen, OAM, was born in a refugee camp in Itang, Ethiopia, and raised in several refugee camps, separated from her mother at a very young age before moving to Australia at the age of 18. Nyadol has completed a Bachelor of Arts at Victoria University and her Juris Doctor at the University of Melbourne. Nyadol is a vocal advocate for human rights, focusing on legal reform, social justice, and multiculturalism. Dr. Kylie Moore Gilbert is a political scientist specialising in Islam and the Middle East. Kylie speaks several Middle Eastern languages and has spent significant periods travelling and conducting academic research in the region. In 2018, she was wrongfully detained during a research trip to Iran and served more than 2 years of a 10-year sentence before being freed in November 2020 in a prisoner exchange deal. Kylie is the author of the best-selling 2022 memoir, The Uncaged Sky. And to moderate our discussions today, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Breann Fallon from the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. Breann has extensive experience working in the cultural sectors, educating on the Holocaust and human rights. Breann works to spread awareness of human rights across multiple platforms. She served on the 2023 Federal State Advisory Panel into the banning of Nazi symbols and is a presenter for ABC Radio National's Religion and Ethics Unit. Dr. Fallon is head of programming and exhibitions at the museum, leads the strategy and delivery of education, collections and curatorial in order to create meaningful, relevant and lasting experiences for all of our visitors. I'll hand over to you, Breann. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I have a problem, and that is that Nina answered all my questions. But with these experts on the panel, I think we should delve a little bit deeper into some of the questions that we have this evening. The best part of a panel is getting to know you better. So I'd like to start by asking each of you, we have this theme tonight, the fragility of freedom, and that word democracy has already come up multiple times. So I might start all the way down the end with Kylie. I would just love to hear from you. How does your work intersect with this theme, and what's the theme mean to you?
Gosh, it feels strange talking about my own experience, given the very esteemed presence of so many incredible Holocaust survivors here in this room, and hearing the incredible speech by Nina just then, which totally blew me away. It's such an honor to be here and to speak with you all today. And what I went through just pales in comparison. I feel silly even speaking about it, to be honest. I was deprived of my freedom for a comparatively brief period of time, 2 years and 3 months, when I was arrested wrongfully in Iran and charged with espionage for the Zionist regime, and given a 10-year sentence. And it's true, you know, what Nina said, you don't value these, you know, democracy, freedom, the rule of law, a functioning society that, you know, is not massively corrupt, or any of the other incredible gifts that we have here in Australia, until those things are taken away from you. And, you know, as somebody who was put before a kangaroo court and was not even able to obtain legal advice or present evidence in my own defense, and was thus convicted in this kind of Kafkaesque trial, and really did see the sort of depths of the way that the authoritarian machine operates, I think, in many authoritarian parts of the world, not just Iran. It really taught me the value of freedom. And I learned many lessons about freedom, but the fact that it is something that we as human beings need in order to thrive and really to survive in this world as complete people is something that really I was struck with when I was there. And you almost need freedom to breathe and to get up in the morning every day. And without it, you're almost subhuman. So I could keep going, but I'll let others speak. But thank you so much for having me once again. It's a real honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Kylie, and we really appreciate your candour. Nigel, we heard from Steve, you have both professional and lived experience in this space. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Can I first say it's tremendous. It's quite humbling to be here and sit among people who survive one of the most horrific crimes we've witnessed as a human race. So, and acknowledging that 75 years might sound like a long time, but it's probably not that long time as well. So I feel tremendously humbled to be here. I should make a correction though. I am no longer a vocal advocate. A lot of my vocal advocacy is now directed at my little children to get them to eat their veggies. So I have withdrawn, at least publicly. But I think in the theme today connects both personally and professionally. More personally than professionally. I was a commercial lawyer, and I suppose you do need freedom to some degree to conduct commercial transactions. But in the context of human rights, it is a key theme on which you almost build every other aspect of dignity in a human life. But more personally to me, I think the concept of democracy, freedom, and the fragility of both, when I say it connects to me personally more, is that it reflects the fragility of our humanity. In a sense, the challenge that we face in having difficult conversations, democratically and personally, are in themselves, I think, evidence of how difficult it is sometimes just to be human and to care and to extend grace to other people. So for me, I think when I think about the concept of the fragility of democracy and connect it to the fragility of me as a person, what I think about the value of democracy that I take is that democracy is not so much protecting you against others, it's equally about protecting others against you, against your sharper edges, against your unthought comments that you splash out on Facebook, that there is a duty too on you, on how you conduct yourself towards other people, sometimes especially when you disagree. So that's how I think I'm thinking about it.
Thank you so much. You've already given us some sort of practical elements there, which we will touch on a little bit later. Dan, if you could let us know about how this theme relates to you professionally or personally.
Sure, I'll do the best to block out in my head the question that keeps coming up again and again, which is, what is this schlemiel like me doing in the company of such extraordinary and inspiring women? Not that it's a contest, but you're humbled. I'm humbled. So I have the great privilege at Monash University to teach the modern Middle East and to teach the history of Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And firstly, I just want to acknowledge, as Nina has done, the great pain that our community has been in over the past couple of months. Something that has really struck me about the classes that I teach, people always ask, what's it like to teach a unit like this? Or, isn't campus such a polarizing place? Aren't people always screaming? And that's never what it's like. In fact, the students that are in our classrooms, and I think the vast majority of students, and I think this is probably true for most of Australian society, I think they're the silent majority. They are those that have become too afraid to engage difficult topics because the discourse publicly is so polarizing. So what's happened to my work as a result of all of this is I've increasingly tried to blend my work as a historian with research into psychology. And what I'm trying to do increasingly is find out ways to make our students, and hopefully in turn others in Australian society, get better at talking about difficult topics, and to try to find a way to speak across difference and not simply just scream at each other, whether online or in person.
This idea of learning and conversation has come up in what the three of you have already discussed. And I promised you I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to put the questions down. And I want to ask, when I first started my journey in this history, I went into it thinking, how could we not have learned? How could we not have learnt the lessons of the past? And it was a wonderful colleague of mine, Professor Conrad Queet, who said, you'll learn that we haven't learnt anything. And I'm wondering, you all talked about this idea of education and learning. Have we learnt? Are we capable of learning? What do you think is the greatest lesson that we need to learn? I might go in the middle with Nyadol to start.
I was sorry. Sorry, I was hoping that somebody else was going to take that first question so I can try and come up with a smart answer. I think I agree with the professor that I don't think we learn much from history, and that most of the time we are often at the edge of repeating these, I suppose, statements or commitments for them to never happen again. And I'm not sure, honestly, I'm not sure what I can say is a lesson that we should learn, because this is one of the few conversations I was invited to that I really found myself having to think deeply whether I could do it with honesty and authenticity and respect to the history that is, to some degree, a history I could never fully know. And I want to talk about this experience of coming to the decision, because I think it explains why it is difficult for me to say what lesson we can learn. I came to this country as a refugee, and after finishing my legal studies, I worked at Arnold Bloch Liebler, an excellent law firm. And I'm not saying that because there might be some former Arnold Bloch Liebler partners here. I am saying that because I got tremendous good legal training there. But at the same time, I started advocating for African Australian community on some political issue that had gone political. And I was tremendously supported by the firm. I was constantly on the media talking about racism and really, really sensitive political issues that I think most law firms would have walked away and thought that's too much for a junior lawyer to be doing. And having conversations with some of the partners, most of them said that they might not have agreed with what I said, which makes sense because I was at the time vocal, but that they supported me because they knew from history what it is like when racism is weaponized. That history had told them that it was important for people to stand up and make a voice. So that was my first interaction, I suppose, with people that have now become my friends who are Jewish. And then my connection grew, and I would say that there are many people who I consider really close friends who are Jewish. Then the conflict happened, and even before then, I suppose, I got numerous challenges. It's currently the case in public that you must make a statement. And one of the reasons I had to think about coming here was because the mere act of coming here was seen as a statement. And I had tremendous difficulty with that, because it meant to a certain degree that turning up here meant that I supported everything about a particular stand. And I felt that that was a problem because it meant that I could not associate with people who were Jewish. Essentially, it almost came down to that. And I knew to some degree that that fear had crept into me too. That fear that somehow we cannot stand up and speak up for what have happened because we will be judged. So the lesson is mine more than anybody else's here. It is, how do you carry all of the history that you know, the past, the present, and what might likely happen? How do you not choose between one and the other? How do you stand up for this, even if you oppose something else? And to be honest, I don't think I know. I think that many people, if we are to be generous, are trying to know. Hopefully, let's hope that they're trying to know. But I wanted to come here because I knew this stood for something. That no matter our disagreement, we do not get to generalize each other, because that is the cause of the first element of pain. If I generalize everybody, then I treat them as if they don't matter. So I'm here because I knew that I had to challenge my own fear about generalizing others, about my own perception, about what people are going to say. And so maybe that's what we learn. maybe that's the lesson, is how do you carry it all, the pain and the despair, and how do you find a way of still reaching out? I'm not sure if I'm making sense. This is one of the few times I wish I'd written a speech.
You definitely are making sense, and thank you for facing that fear. I know that for a lot of us right now, there are a million thoughts going through our mind, and sometimes it's hard to hold all of those in one space. And so thank you for doing the courageous thing and being here. We're all the better for you being here, and we really appreciate your honesty. And Kylie, all the way down the end there.
You keep mentioning that. Have I been exiled to the very end of the stage? Is that your point?
You feel so far from me, but the question was, have we learnt? Can we learn? What can we learn about ourselves, about the world, when we look at the past, our present and future?
Oh my God, what a deep philosophical question that is. I'm an optimistic person, I think, at heart. And when I see the level of polarization that Nayadol just mentioned, that Nina was talking about in her speech, this sort of both political extremes, both populist, both becoming more and more extreme and creating this binary, pick a side kind of culture that we're seeing both left and right now, not only in Australia, but across the Western world. It is extremely worrying and disheartening, but I refuse to let that be the future and the reality that I see, in 10 years' time, or, whatever projection we're looking at. The thing about us humans is that we are capable of changing our minds. And there is a kind of a group think about a lot of what's happening right now. And you do wonder, when you start to individually pull people out of that group and ask them what do they actually think deep inside, you might find more variety and far less binary than we might assume exists. But even the most extreme people, and this recollection just occurred to me now when I was hearing what Nayadol was saying. I lived for more than 2 years among some of the most hardcore anti-Semites you can possibly imagine, and that's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who have held, conventions on Holocaust denial and have sponsored awards and cartoon contests on Holocaust denial, and, are really at the most extreme end of the extreme. And I spoke about the Holocaust and about Israel with them many times. It was an obsession of theirs, and they loved to come and poke at me with it, especially when I learnt Farsi and I could have a more robust conversation with my captors about this issue. They even filmed me in a film studio and asked me about the events of the Holocaust and told me to recount them in Farsi for the benefit of the camera. I have no idea why and what they have done with this film since. It boggles the mind. I don't think it was for purposes of education, but there was one captor that I developed something of a relationship with, and he was very hardcore, like anti-Semitic. And I actually wrote once, we had a debate about the Holocaust, and I wrote in Farsi an essay, terrible Farsi, using my dictionary, looking up every second word, and it took me painstaking, a couple of days to write this essay, telling him the basic events of the Holocaust and thinking back to my own, fairly limited education, why it had occurred. And, some of that we heard from Nina just then about the propaganda and about the fact that it begins with this basic dehumanization. It doesn't begin with, gas chambers and executions. And he came up to me after I gave him this essay, and he had read it, which I wasn't sure he would actually do. And he said to me kind of in private, "Kylie, I accept that this happened, but the official line of my organization is that it didn't happen, and therefore I have to say that it didn't happen and never ask me about it again. But actually, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, okay, I accept, the Holocaust actually is a historical event that occurred." For me, that was a great victory. I don't know if it was down to me changing his mind. Maybe he had always thought that, but had never really seen a need to voice it. But if somebody there in that extreme organization in the Islamic Republic of Iran dedicated to the destruction of Israel, who's, launching these Holocaust denying events, can admit that all of that is incorrect and actually he accepts that it happened. For me, that was a very small victory that taught me a lesson that people's minds change, even those guys at the very extreme. Therefore, if we do continue to push and we continue to educate and speak out, and we don't let, us in the silent majority, we keep hearing this phrase, we don't stay silent and let things happen as bystanders, perhaps there is that kernel of hope that, even the most extreme minds can be changed. I am at least optimistic in that regard.
What a remarkable story. Dan, I've done you a dodgy. I've made you go last twice in a row.
It's exactly as it should be. Who are we kidding? I'm in awe of both of the courage that it took for both of you in your accounts to reach across difference, to hold multiple feelings all at once, but to not feel that you have to be dragged into an us or them, an either or situation. And I think that we all have so much to learn from these extraordinary women on the panel. Our brains are plastic and they can change. And there are very important lessons that we can learn and things that we all can do today to help promote democracy and to help promote some of the values that we're speaking about here. When people talk about preserving democracy, we often speak about governments, we speak about the law. Let's just talk about how we relate to one another. Let's talk about the Shabbos table. Let's talk about our homes. Let's talk about how we talk to our friends. And most importantly, let's talk about how we speak with people who have views that are different than our own. A couple of suggestions, and this comes from the world of cognitive science and neuroscience, where I've been doing a lot of reading and thinking in terms of teaching. Rule number 1, stop trying to have debates. Debates are about winners and losers, right? It's a black and white. What happens if two people with different views share similar values? What happens if, in fact, both of them might have kernels of truth in what they're sharing? What happens if what they're arguing is based on their perspectives and their experiences, which are fundamentally different? And this is usually what happens, right? So instead of a debate, try a conversation. Instead of having a warrior mindset, try having an explorer mindset. Deal empathically with the person that you're speaking with. Be curious about what brought them to thinking about the ways that they think. That's number 1. Number 2, humility, humility, humility. There's this, we're all unfortunately a prisoner of this belief that the way in which we perceive the world is the way things are. But all of us as human beings, we all have our blind spots, we all have our biases. And to be able to carry within us that doubt, even in the most fearful and difficult moments, to say, wait, maybe there might be a different way to see this. Maybe let me just try to hear, even for a moment, the human being on the other side of this. Doing that, I think, is such an important way in which to prevent the type of essentializing that you were talking about, where we just, in one fell swoop, make broad generalizations about an entire group of people. So humility, doubt, and just having the courage to treat those with different opinions as human beings worthy of our time.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. No, I didn't mean to cut you overall. I think when you were speaking, what I was thinking was, it is such a wonderful list. How do you do it at a difficult time? Because I think that's the challenge. Is like, how do you do it at a time when there are high emotions, toxic environment? And so, to me, actually, I should go back a little bit. It is not courageous at all to have come here, but thank you for that comment. It is absolutely it. In the context of survivors in this room, coming here was absolutely not a courageous act. But tying the two bit together, what it was is that I was trying to explain the difficulty, I suppose, in the time that we live in to carry any level of nuance. And in fact, nuance itself is a form of attack now. So if you try to have nuance, you're told that's a very privileged position to have. which I think contextually, maybe it's right. If you are in Australia, you are relatively privileged one way or the other. But the difficulty with the lack of being able to maintain that nuance, I think, is what imprisons any reasonable debate. To me, nuance, for example, would mean in this particular context that I come aware of the fact that multiple things can be true at the same time. And that sometimes it is not my position to make a statement, that I don't have to make a statement on anything. And the reason why I say that was because my past advocacy had been about things that had happened to people that I knew, about racism or anti-blackness, quite in some ways personal. But even when I did that advocacy, I was always conscious of saying, I am not speaking for all Black people, because surely I could not. So bringing that again, this idea that I am not a person who know what it is like to carry the history of 6 million people being systematically killed. And so for you to demand that I make a certain statement, I don't know how that statement echo to a group of people that carry a history like that. So there's certain statement that might not be mine to make. So it might be possible that silence is not complicit, that silence is admitting that this is a word or a history that I do not know how to say it without saying more. And that is not somehow an acceptable position to take, apparently, in the society we have. And then finally, to come to the point of context, then, what nuance means for me is placing oneself in context. I am in Australia at the moment. I can sit at a table and kiss my children goodnight and put them to bed and feed them. That is absolutely a privilege, absolutely a privilege. But it means as well that the way in which I conduct any conversation admits that privilege and doesn't somehow adopt an identity that is not placed within Australia here, to adopt a tone that accuses other Australians of act that they cannot be possibly responsible for, to accuse them of having to take, of moral failure over things that they have no control over. So that then to me is another element of what nuance is to place myself within the context in which I am and then to have conversation from that position. It is quite different what someone else might say. The problem, I think, for democracy, for personal relationship, is that it is tremendously hard to do that when it is tremendously important to do that. Because the problems that are difficult to solve are not going to be solved at the same emotional level that caused them. We have to find a deeper way of dealing with it. And that's really hard. So that's what I was trying to get at when I was talking about the journey to be here. Anyway.
We've had this sort of amazing examples from all three of you, this idea of conversation with humility, with context, with nuance, and then Kylie giving us an example. And this idea of difficult conversations and difficult times, I get it, because I couldn't even have it with my own husband. We ended in a debate. There had to be a winner and there had to be a loser, and nobody won. We both lost because we actually weren't listening. We weren't hearing each other. And Nigel, you said that back at the beginning when you said, approach human to human. That idea of trying to actually listen and hear the other person. So I'm going to make you do something very difficult, all three of you. And Dan, I promise to let you go first this time. To wrap up, one thing that we can do, everybody in this room, when we leave, to do honour to the past, to protect democracy, and to halt the fragility of freedom. Dan.
We live in a world where we are forced to choose either or. Instead of either or, the next time you come up against a contentious issue, try both and. Okay? That's it.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that went first. I would say the mess is the point. I think that sometimes life is messy. Topics are messy. I don't think there will ever be clear times when it's morally. I think that embracing some of the mess is the point. One of the ways I suppose I've tried to embrace, when I say mess, I mean the fact that people are emotional and they come with their different ideas and passionate and angry and justified and maybe not justified and all of that, right? So I think that the way I've tried to deal with that in my life is to have those conversations privately. One of the reasons I have insisted I'm not going to make a statement beside the point that I mentioned about the nuances, because I think that those are statements you wrestle with people with in private. So I've wrestled with friends from very different backgrounds and ethnicities. I've wrestled with them. I've tried to tell them my truth. They've tried to tell me their truth. And when things have got really, really difficult, and you can see those relationships at the edge, I ended up writing this, I think it's weird to me, comment is, I love Michael Gwenda. I love Michael Gwenda. Michael Gwenda is a good friend of mine who I've come to know, who I consider a father. And so I come back to that because I realize most of us, I would like to think, most of us care and deeply love those who are close to us. And so I bring myself back to that person is just loving their person, their survival as much. So Michael become a reflection for me. I'm not sure if it's useful, but
thank you, Kylie.
What do I add to that? These two amazing, profound answers. I don't know. I mean, I just would say we need to nurture more democratic literacy, particularly within our own families, starting with our own children, for instance. I don't think schools do a very good job of teaching about democracy, about how Australian democracy works, for instance, where democracy comes from, how it evolved and developed throughout history, why we live in a democratic state as we do today, and not having that nuance, that context. I think it's difficult to sort of not take it for granted, maybe, particularly if that's all you've ever known. And so, again, going back to Iran, it's quite interesting in that there, I'd say the majority of the population, and we've certainly seen it in the past 12 months or so, there's a huge desire and a yearning for democracy, and there's a great level of democratic literacy actually in society. People know what they don't have, and they want those democratic institutions. They want freedom of speech and the rule of law and a just judicial system and the ability to go and vote for their leaders, but they don't have it. And it's kind of almost, in a way, the flip side of some of what you see here today is that we've got all of that, but we don't value it necessarily, and we're quite prone to taking it for granted. And I think nurturing that democratic literacy and that understanding and therefore valuing of democracy is really important if we want to sustain it into the future.
Can I just thank you all? It would have been very easy for this panel to have been at arm's length, for us to speak platitudes and not get down into real examples, honest feelings, and that's thanks to your candor, all three of you this evening. You've really helped us delve into the ideas that Nina raised and given us all something very practical to leave with this evening. Please join me in thanking our panellists.
So we're going to change pace a little bit now and change the mood. And it is with pleasure that I invite Melbourne jazz vocalist Alma Zigia to the stage to sing Oifen Pribenchik. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I guess through this time, I've been really inspired by the bravery of the Jewish community and the connections I've made. It's been obviously a terrible time for all of us, and, there's been a lot of isolation. I live in Northcote, so, and most of my friends are not Jewish, so there's been some considerable isolation, but also through this time, I found like amazing connections with people who maybe I never would have. So I'm grateful for that. And I want to dedicate this song to my Babsa and Jaja, who are not with us anymore, but they were Holocaust survivors, Tajik and Lucha Ziga. So thank you. Oifen pripechik, plenta faieru, hun in stubis heis, und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinderlach, dem Eile Beis. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinderlach, dem Eile Beis. Zetje kinderlach, gedenk shetayere, was ihr lernt da. Zog je noch amol und age noch amol, komm mit Zeile vor. Zog je noch amol und age noch amol, komm mit Zeile vor. Asyl ve Kinder hätte wären, wir ihr allein verstehen, wie voll in die Euches liegen Tränen und wie voll Gewinn. Wie voll in die Euches liegen Tränen und wie voll Gewinn. Zetje kinderlach, gedenk shetayere, was ihr lernt da. Zog je noch amol und age noch amol, komm mit Zeile vor. Zog je noch amol und age noch amol, komm mit Zeile vor.
So we're going to have the candle lighting now. So I'm going to call 6 people to the stage to light one of the candles. So the first candle lighter is Ronald Schweitzer. Ronald is the son of Frida Schweitzer, who was born in 1924 in Sosnowiec, Poland. Frida and her family stayed together until 1940, and she was taken to a labour camp in Czechoslovakia. Frida was liberated on the 8th of May 1945, but when she came home, she discovered her sister and mother were murdered at Auschwitz. Her eldest brother had perished at a labour camp. Her father and older brother survived in Bergen-Belsen. Frida reunited with them and they made their way to Australia. It's the first candle. Thank you. Ash Jensen. Ash is the grandson of Danuta Jarowski, one of the righteous among the nations in Australia. At 12 years old, Danuta Siwiska assisted her mother, Kristina Siwiska, to protect Jewish families in the Grodno ghetto in Poland. Andrei Dubrovnin. Andrei was born in Brussels, and he was less than 12 months old when the war impacted Belgium in May 1940. His parents decided to flee and were caught at the French border. All 3 family members were sent to Drancy internment camp in Paris. Andrei was smuggled out of the camp and spent the war years living with different people and families not known to him. His parents were murdered in Auschwitz, and Andrei was adopted by his uncle and wife at the end of the war. They arrived in Australia in 1948. Nyadol Nuam OAM. Nyadol, as you heard, was born in a refugee camp in Itang, Ethiopia, raised in several refugee camps and separated from her mother at a very young age before moving to Australia at the age of 18. Nyadol has completed a Bachelor of Arts at Victoria University and Juris Doctor at the University of Melbourne. She is an advocate for human rights, focusing on legal reform, social justice and multiculturalism. Colin Kreitzer. Mazel Tov, Colin, on receiving an OAM in the recent Australia Day Honours. Colin is co-convener of Aleph Melbourne, a social support and advocacy group for LGBTQI+ families and people in Melbourne's Jewish community. Aleph Melbourne was founded in 1995. Aleph organises the annual Jews of Pride contingent in the Melbourne Pride March. And Andy Factor is the sixth candle lighter. Andy was born in Plauen, Germany in 1924. He was 9 years old when the Nazis came to power in Germany. After the anti-Semitic laws were introduced in Germany, he experienced isolation and humiliation. Andy and his family arrived in Australia in 1940, and he is an active survivor guide at the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. Andy celebrated his 100th birthday a few weeks ago. So let us stand for a moment's silence and remember those who perished during the Holocaust. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Das Untervolk zwischen Fallen die gewähnt. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Tozog nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Chotsch Himmeln bleien, verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau. Sveta beugt on unser Trotz mir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau. Sveta beugt on unser Trotz mir seinen Do.
Thank you for coming tonight.